Hello, Pittsburgh. I'm Zac Gibson, and this is TribLive's From the Newsroom podcast, bringing you top stories from TribLive.com. 63-year-old Butler native and Oakmont teacher Marc Fogel has been released and is back in the United States. Fogel spent 1,278 days in a Russian penal colony. And after being left behind in a prisoner exchange during the Biden administration, he finally received the wrongfully detained status from the United States government in December. Now, a month into the second Trump administration, the White House has secured Fogel's release. Lori Falce and Megan Swift join me today with details.
Hi.
This is the first time we've had two guests on from the newsroom, so welcome to you both. So this was a very welcome shakeup to our day yesterday. News on a story that TribLive has been following for a long time. Let's get straight into it. Can you tell me what's the latest news on Marc Fogel? The information came that he was being released on Tuesday, and he was expected to be home on American soil the same night.
He was back last night. He landed around 9:30 in Washington, D.C., and he did meet with President Trump and various members of the congressional delegation, and I believe Secretary of State Rubio last night at the White House. There was a meeting when he got there that was very celebratory, very excited just to have him back. And then there was a brief there were remarks from Trump and Fogel.
And he was holding an icy beer can.
Wearing a Steelers hat.
Yeah.
He's a very passionate Pittsburgh sports fan. When we had the chance to talk last year, his mother was talking to him about his various surgeries and things. And he's like, yeah, Mom, my first surgery, it was right after the Pens won their Stanley Cup. And so that's how he dates things in his life.
All right. A diehard Pittsburgh sports fan. So with all of this new information, we also learned that in this trade, there was someone that Russia received in order to secure the release of Fogel.
Reuters confirmed this morning that Alexander Vinnik, who is a cybercrime leader who was arrested in 2017, he's being sent back to Russia. I don't know where he is at the moment, but there was confirmation that he was the trade in that case.
Okay. Let's break into laying out the details of the story. Now, TribLive has followed Marc's story pretty much since the beginning. Lori, last time we spoke about Marc Fogel, you told me that we have had a process or initiative trying to keep his name in news through editorial articles, yes?
Right. We didn't cover it from the very beginning because really nobody knew about him. It was about 6 months into his arrest before we knew that he was out there. But we've been covering him as long as we knew about it. We've been demanding that he be returned. We've covered it from news articles. Paula Reed Ward, who did the big story on the release, has been instrumental in that. But we've had so many people from staff who have been covering his story from news angles over the last 3 years. But from the editorial side, I made a decision right around the time that Brittany Griner was arrested to keep his name out there. And my goal was to have an editorial a month on him until he was home. Sometimes it's been more than that. Sometimes it's been a little less because I didn't want to make them an editorial for editorial's sake. I wanted to have a news aspect to tie it to. So last year we did 14 and they were pegged to things like Alexei Navalny's death in a Russian prison and the release of Brittany Griner's book, so that when she was out talking, she was doing a big press tour. When she was talking to people and doing interviews, it gave us a reason to talk about, she said this happened to her, so what's happening to Marc Fogel? And then, of course, the prisoner swap in August was a huge reason to talk about, because Evan Gershkovich was officially convicted. And that was what they needed to do in order to effectuate the swap. So when he was convicted, we knew that a swap was probably going to be happening soon. So we talked about that and urged people not to forget about him. And then about a week later, the swap happened and he was left at home. So we talked about that. We said we were very pointed in saying that the government screwed up by leaving him behind. This was not fair. And we kept that going the whole time that he was being held.
Okay. Now, I just think it's something unique about the newsroom to have that ability to bring this recognition and prominence on a repetitive basis.
Right. The editorials are a different animal than a news story. As somebody who was always a reporter, I want all of the editorials to be grounded in news stories, and I never want the editorials to be leading the news. So I'm incredibly grateful to the reporters who were able to keep the story out there as things were happening. But the editorials, because it was something that we had already covered extensively, I was able to write about things that were happening in other places that we weren't necessarily covering, like Alexei Navalny's death. It wasn't something we were writing about in Pittsburgh. We were running wire for that, but it gave us an excuse to talk about it. We were also able to treat this as a local story, just the way the Wall Street Journal did a lot of the same things with Evan Gershkovich during his incarceration. They hit that hard and they hit it often because it was a story that was important to them. They are a national organization, but it was important to them in their building. That was important to them locally. Mark was important to us locally. He's an Allegheny County guy. He's a teacher from Oakmont. He might have been teaching in Moscow when he was arrested, but he's a history teacher from Oakmont. He grew up in Butler. He's a southwestern Pennsylvania guy. He is a small town, local guy, and he's ours. And we made it. The Wall Street Journal might have been doing what they could to bring their guy home. We've spent 3 years trying to bring ours home.
Okay. So in this 3 years, Mark has been through a lot. I'm going to ask you to lay out this timeline for our listeners and really detail the process from his detainment on August 14th of 2021.
Mark was arrested at the airport with 17 grams of medicinal marijuana that was legally prescribed to him and legally dispensed in Pennsylvania. Is that necessarily a good thing to take on a plane to another country, particularly Russia? Not necessarily. People have been critical of it. Like in everything that we write, there is always some response, like on Facebook or social media, where people are saying, well, what was he expecting? He was taking weed on a plane. He knew what he was doing, but he also had his marijuana card. He had his prescription. He had every intention to declare it. And he believed that he was doing the right thing. Like, it's not even, not to victim blame Brittany Griner, but like hers was an accident. She didn't intend to take it on the plane. It was an oversight. And as soon as she saw that, according to her interviews, she was like, oh, I'm in trouble. He has a chronic pain condition. He's had surgeries and documentation. We have his x-rays that show the screws in his spine. This is not something that somebody faked so that they could get high. This is a medical condition. And he believed he was doing it the right way. The Russians had a different opinion of that, and they arrested him. And the problem comes in with the wrongful detention designation that was withheld from Mark for like more than 3 years, is that the sentence that he was given was disproportionately higher than it would have been for other people who were picked up on the same charge. If you were a college student who was there on a trip and you just happened to have you were not going to get 14 years. 14 years is remarkably close to the sentence that was given to Paul Whelan and Evan Gershkovich for purported espionage. Brittany Griner, for instance, was only given 9 years, and she was marked as wrongfully detained. That discrepancy is what drove a lot of the passion behind people who were supporting him.
Now, you mentioned his sentencing, which happened in June of 2022.
Right.
He was sentenced to 14 years by the Russian government after several hearings in a regional court. You also mentioned Brittany Griner's release. which happened on December 8th of 2022. Tell me about what it was like to hear from Marc, because between 2022 and our next big date in our timeline, which is the presidential election, you had the chance to speak with Marc Fogel's mother, Malphine, where we had a surprise call from Marc himself.
We had been in touch with the family. Paula Reed Ward has been in touch with the sisters quite a bit, with his sisters, Anne and Lisa. And I had been working to stay in touch with his mother through a spokesperson for the family. And we had set up an opportunity for me to go and talk with her at her home in Butler. I did not go in with the intention of interviewing her. I had told her, I just want to come out and talk to you. I want you to get to know me and realize that you can trust me with your son's story.
Right.
And while I was there, we were talking. She's the most adorable. She looks so much like my grandma. It's ridiculous. While I'm there, we were connecting, and she was like, if you want to interview me, go get your notebook. It's fine. So I went out to the car. I got my notebook. I came back in, and we were talking for a few minutes. While I was sitting there, the phone rang, and she got it, and she was like, it's Marc. Because it was the State Department calling her, and they would put calls through, and she recognized that number. So she's like, I just need to take this. I'm like, yes, you need to take this. Yeah. Talk to your son. Go ahead. And again, I didn't intend to steal an interview from her while she had this very brief moment with her son. But while she was sitting there talking to him, she said, I'm sitting here with a reporter from the Tribune Review, and they decided to talk to me. And it was the first time that he had talked with a reporter while he was in jail.
I need help. That's all there is to it. And
Absolutely.
If some people can get released, then let's, get a 63-year-old teacher, who's firmly middle class. You see where I'm from, Butler, PA.
Yeah.
It's not like I got, major entities on my side like other people do. I'm, the Main Street guy that I would like to have help. And whatever they can do, I plead for it. I beg for it.
He was able to share a lot about the conditions that he was in, about his pain, we found out that he had been hospitalized 3 times at that point. It was later, he said he has spent more than 400 days in hospitals while he's been there, and that all he wanted was to come home, that the idea of getting home to his family was the thing that kept him going.
I say, please give me strength and faith and patience. Please look over my mom. Please have mercy on my family.
And it was a very moving interview. His mother cried. He cried. I cried. It was amazing to be able to talk to him from knowing where he was and what was going on.
Absolutely. Now, Megan, you also got to speak with Marc's mother. We'll get into that in just a little bit. But talking about Marc's family, they have an air of perseverance and persistence that I think needs to be mentioned in this discussion. Even throughout what was at the time the start of a very energetic election, there were calls from the family to get recognition for Marc and a voice that was trying to bring him home. Can you tell me about some of the efforts that the family went through to gain attention and gain traction for the support for Marc?
There'd been a campaign of attempts. They'd gone to a lot of their local, from the congressional delegation, Mike Kelly, Chris DeLuzio. Mike Kelly is the Butler congressman. Chris DeLuzio represents Oakmont. So those two were very heavily involved. Guy Reschenthaler has been a real force in it as well. Bob Casey was heavily involved while he was in office. Dave McCormick has definitely stepped up into that role since then. And Fetterman has also been involved a lot. Marco Rubio, before he became Secretary of State, was also one of the early people who was pushing for Marc's release when he was just the Florida senator.
Okay.
Yeah, and during the Butler rally with Donald Trump last year, during his presidential campaign, July 13th, she was able to talk with Trump about her son's release. Malphine was able to talk with him. And that was the same day that the assassination attempt occurred on Trump there at his rally. So she spoke with me yesterday about that experience talking with Trump and confirmed that since that conversation, she had not had any other contact with Trump or his administration up until his release.
Okay. Now, the conversation with presidents is something that comes up another time during this timeline for the Fogel family, just after the prisoner swap in August of 2024. This prison swap was a multinational deal between various countries, the United States, Russia, Germany, Norway, Belarus, Slovenia, and Turkey. Out of a total 24 prisoners that were shuffled in this deal, Marc Fogel was left. We got to hear from Marc about what it felt like to be left out of that prisoner exchange. Lori, can you tell me more about that?
Marc called his family a day or two after the swap, and that call was recorded, and they shared it with me. He was very upset. He was distraught. He really believed that he was going to be coming home.
I know you feel that now. It just, as I told you, hold on. Please hold on.
That designation thing is just so flummoxing.
Well,
Don't even mention my name, Vicky.
And he had believed the same thing when Brittany Griner was released. And to have it happen again was just devastating for him. And he was very emotional on the tape. He said that he was in a dark place.
Runs and runs and runs. The anger and the frustration after coming out of the hospital the other day. I don't know if I said it, but I was just like, it's just like I'm in a bottomless pit. It just keeps getting worse. I just keep getting kicked down farther and farther and farther. And, as I'm trying to recover from that, this happens. It's hard to have anything.
And I think that a lot of people were very concerned about what that meant and what that was going to mean for him going forward. I know I spoke to Senator Casey afterward, and he was deeply concerned about what that was going to mean for Marc's health, for him to be that distraught. I know that other members of the congressional delegation were also very worried about him. I believe that Kelly and DeLuzio in particular put out statements about that.
In our previous conversation about Fogel, we got to hear in the call a description of the conditions where Marc was being held. We also heard about his process that gave him hope. Lori, can you refresh our listeners' memory?
One of the things that he did every day, he had a mantra that he repeated that was just about getting home. I need to get home to my family. Please get me home to my family. But one of the things that he did physically that tried to keep him going was he would take walks around the colony, and they had a small chapel that had icons. And that really stuck out to me because his mother also, the couch where she sits, there is this lamp on one side of it where her rosary hangs. And the fact that she was sitting there next to her rosary and he's taking walks to this chapel where there are icons of the faith, that really, it showed me a connection between them and how they were both leaning on the same things to get through.
It's great. I have the ability to go into this church and have this time. It's quite helpful for me.
And Malphine spoke about how she was praying that rosary at least once a day, sometimes twice a day, along with her sisters, other family members. She said that prayer really, that's what got them through that 3.5 years. I also wanted to add that Malphine told me Marc is an avid reader, and he read Moby Dick 3 times while he was detained, and he completed the more than 1,200 pages of War and Peace. However, Malphine said he had to eventually part with the books that he received from people that had shipped them, just because of the regulations within the imprisonment. And she told me that he, quote, said, "There was nothing to do, but he wasn't doing hard labor either. There was nothing to do while he was there."
I know one of the things that people tried to show their support for him by sending him cards and letters. And the fact that they were sending him cards and letters meant a lot to his family and to him. But he didn't get most of them because they were withheld because the Russian prison couldn't read them and didn't know what was in them. So since they were in English and they couldn't scan them to see if there was some kind of message, they just kept them and didn't pass them on to him.
Well, they mentioned yesterday that the cousin had just sent the latest batch of letters on Saturday, so just days before they heard of his release. So I guess they're just out in the void now. He won't get those. But they had another package of letters that they still have here in Western PA that he'll, I assume, will be able to receive once he's back in the area.
Okay. So it's very clear that across the board, there's a lot of support at the time for securing Marc Fogel's release, even to the point that in mid-October, President Joe Biden called Marc's wife to tell her that his administration was continuing to work to obtain Fogel's release. Now, one of the angles that is recurring not only in TribLive news media, but across larger outlets was the seemingly small but important fact that President Joe Biden at the time never mentioned Marc Fogel by name.
That was a lot of the focus of our editorials in 2023 was just an attempt to get his name said. And honestly, we weren't even asking just for President Biden to say it. He was very seldom mentioned by anyone in the government at all. They might respond to questions, but they didn't say his name. They didn't bring him up when they brought other people up. Like there was a period where the last time somebody from the administration, I believe it was it was like an undersecretary from the State Department, mentioned his name on December 8th, 2022, when Brittany was released. But from then until mid-2024, it was crickets. Nobody was saying his name. And there was increasingly little response when you would ask. When you would send a request for information to the State Department, what you got back was basically a list of bullet-pointed form letter kind of responses. So a lot of, like I said, in 2023, our idea was say his name. In 2024, his name would pop up and we were like pushing for more action and calling out the president specifically when he wasn't saying the name. There were opportunities. There were 2 State of the Unions where he brought up Paul Whelan at both of them. In the second one, he brought up Gershkovich and Whelan. It would have taken nothing to add Fogel to that list when he said it, and he didn't. When Navalny was killed and they brought up Gershkovich and Whelan, nobody said Fogel's name. These events, as they came up, we would push for them, and there wasn't really much happening until the prisoner swap. Suddenly that moved Marc up the ladder, and he was the face of wrongfully detained Russian prisoners at that point, even though he had not been determined to be wrongfully detained yet.
And just to add to that, Malfine was saying how despite being thankful that Marc is now back on U.S. soil, she hopes that for any American citizen taken prisoner in a foreign country in the future, that they're given the proper attention so they don't have to wait as long as Marc did.
All of the political people, I think, have done what they could do, right? I don't think they've forgotten Marc, but we're thankful for that.
One of the things that the politicians did was introduce I believe it was in the House, they introduced the Marc Fogel Act. There were other things that were introduced in Congress. I can't stress enough that while there are criticisms that can be made of the administration, and Congress was remarkably bipartisan in its response for this. I don't know that Chris DeLuzio and Guy Reschenthaler agree on a lot, but they agreed on this. This was a guy that they both wanted to see brought home, and they both did what they could to try and make that happen. There were multiple letters that had bipartisan support. There were acts, requests for resolutions to demand his release or to encourage the State Department. But the most profound was in June of 2023 when the Marc Fogel Act was introduced. With a new Congress, if anything was going to be done, that's going to need to basically be started from scratch. It should be. The Marc Fogel Act is an addition to the Levinson Act that would require the State Department to report to Congress when they are not designating somebody as wrongfully detained and say why. And that is important. That needs to be done for other people so that what happened to Mark does not happen to other people. And that is really what the U.S. government can do for Mark to make those 1,278 days mean something.
If I could publish something out there that would get in front of President Biden, what would you want to say?
Please reunite me with my family.
Now, Marc Fogel actually did receive that wrongfully detained status, correct?
It was a year after the act was introduced, more than a year after the act was introduced. Because that was June of 2023 was the introduction. And then we believe it was sometime after October of 2024 that he was finally designated as wrongfully detained.
Okay. Now, the wrongfully detained designation allows an American special envoy to negotiate for the release and permits the family to access much needed resources in these types of situations.
It also allows the U.S. government to demand certain attention for the prisoner in question, as far as like medical things. Like they can say, we need to allow our doctor to come in and see this person. There were things that happened with Paul Whelan because he was wrongfully detained. I think he needed to see a dentist at one point, and he was able to get that assistance from the U.S. government because he had that detention. It also allows for travel for the family. Like if Mark had not been wrongfully detained, Russia might have let him go, but getting home would have been on him. There wouldn't have been a plane that went for him.
So between October and December, Mark is designated as wrongfully detained. Now, yesterday, it was announced that he was released and on his way home. Let's talk about we've talked about it a lot, but I would like to be a little bit more specific about the political visuals at play here. Both Trump and Biden, at the time of the election, noted that they wanted to achieve and secure Marc Fogel's release. But it did not happen under the Biden administration. It was fulfilled just under a month into the second Donald Trump administration. Now, how did Mark's family feel about this?
When they were unable to get the support needed from the Biden administration to push this along, Malphine had turned to Trump, as we mentioned earlier, spoke with him at the Butler rally. And she said yesterday, after hearing the news, that she credits President Trump with his release.
I talked to President Trump at the rally, and I said, you've got to remember Mark's name. And he repeated it. And he went like this. He says, if I get in, he said, I'll get him out. He went like that. He did that 3 different times. And I really think he was instrumental in getting this to happen.
Politically, like in a larger political scope, I think this is something that's going to be looked at very similarly to the Iranian hostage situation from the 70s, where Ronald Reagan was president when they came home. Like it was simultaneously almost with his inauguration. And there is rightfully a lot of criticism of the Carter administration for why didn't he come home sooner. But we do also have to remember that we don't know what we don't know. Diplomacy and negotiations. I mean, like negotiating to buy a car, you don't know what's happening on the other side from the guy who's selling it to you. There could be all kinds of stuff that you're not aware of. When you're talking about negotiations for a hostage release, especially one as complicated as the August 1st prisoner negotiation or prisoner exchange, which was the largest negotiation of its kind in history. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was critical in editorials of the Biden administration repeatedly. I do still acknowledge that there is probably a lot that I don't know about what they were doing, how they were doing it, and how many things needed to be put in place over those 3 years. It would have been great if it was like an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie and somebody just like parachutes in, gets him, and leaves. That would be fantastic. I do also acknowledge that that is unrealistic. So as critical as I have been of the Biden administration over this period of time, we don't know what happened to allow this release yesterday that was put in place earlier. And that is important. We can't underestimate the contributions of the legislators that were involved.
Absolutely.
And as much as we can credit the ones who are there now, we have to acknowledge the ones who were there 2 years ago as well. That was a different crop of legislators, and we have to give them attention at the same time. This was not one person's accomplishment. This was the accomplishment of a Facebook group of hundreds of people supporting Marc. This was the accomplishment of a bunch of people painting pictures of Marc for an attention-grabbing installation. This was the work of all of those legislators, all of those people that wrote letters. It was the State Department, regardless of who was the president at the time. I'm not going to deny that this is a high watermark for Donald Trump. This was an accomplishment, and that cannot be denied. But we have to make sure that we acknowledge all of the little people too.
Last time we were here, Lori, we discussed the incredible burden of responsibility that comes with the most powerful office in the world. Now, with that conversation in mind, tell me about, from your perspective, what the conversation amongst Americans could look like in terms of this becoming an accomplishment from the Trump administration.
I would hope that people will acknowledge how important this is and how positive it is, and that a positive accomplishment like this, where this was a positive effect on someone's life. I want Trump supporters to be wholeheartedly behind that because it is positive. And I want his detractors to acknowledge that he did a good thing. And I want everyone to continue to hold him accountable for continuing to do good and positive work for the American people. And to acknowledge that holding him accountable is not a negative. We should all be held accountable all the time for doing our work well.
All right, let's move on into our last section. As people involved in following this story, I'm sure there must have been emotional points for you as well as the family. So what has Marc's family said since the release? Megan, you got to interview Marc's mother, Malphine, yesterday, so I'm going to give you the space to go ahead and tell us about this interview and what the emotions were like for both you as a reporter and the family.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, just want to say it's not often you get to witness such good news like this, and to be able to report on it and also sit down with Marc's mom, Malphine, who arguably was one of the people most affected by this. It's just a special experience, and her emotions were palpable in that room. It was contagious. She had multiple visitors who came in and sort of interrupted our interview, and I was like, by all means, yeah, like go hug her. Just other family members coming in to share in the joy that she was experiencing.
I can't believe it. Can you? I've been in tears for the last hour.
No, I just sat. I was getting my oil changed, and I sat in the waiting room, bawling my eyes out.
Oh, what's this sound? You don't have to bawl anymore.
Okay, go ahead. What's your interview?
It was honestly remarkable to witness, and I'm very thankful that I got to talk to her and hear about her experiences. And she told me that she actually found out that he was coming home the night before. So this was Monday night this week when she got a call around 11 p.m.
It's from the Moscow airport, and which surprised me because he usually calls in the morning, which is their dinner time. They're about 7 hours ahead of us. And he was calling late at night. Well, it was a little alarming, but he always, every time he calls me, he says, buongiorno, which is good morning in Italian. And he called and he said, buongiorno. I said, who is this? He says, who else calls you and says buongiorno? And he said, I'm in the Moscow airport. And I said, well, what are you doing in the airport? He said, I'm waiting to get on a plane to Washington, D.C. And I just was totally blown away. And he said, I'm coming home.
And so she learned in that moment that he was coming home from prison after more than 3 years. And he told her, quote, I'm waiting to get on a plane to Washington, D.C. She said, I could tell that he was fighting tears. Though the call from Marc on Monday night was brief, Malphine said she could tell that he was, quote, very happy on the phone. And she said she was just in shock after, even though she had been advocating daily for his release, as we have talked about. And then also she talked about for the last few weeks, she had been feeling a little bit hopeful for his release. There weren't any indicators.
I just, the last few weeks, I have had some kind of a feeling that things were moving. And I don't know why. I didn't know of anything in particular that was going on. But I just had that feeling.
A cousin of the family had said that she thought that Marc coming home would be Malphine's birthday present, that she was going to have Marc with her on her birthday, which is on March 11th. She'll turn 96. And it just so happens that this wish has come true for them.
And didn't I tell you, though, that this was going to happen before your birthday?
I said, yeah, it's going to be a birthday present.
I just told her that last week.
Really?
I said, this is going to be her birthday present.
It's...
She was going to have Marc with her.
While we were sitting there talking, the cousin received a texted photo of Marc making what appeared to be a toast on an airplane, and she showed it in real time to Malphine. A photo of him confirmed to be on this plane heading back to the United States.
Oh, no,
Hey, here he is on the plane. Somebody just sent it to me.
Oh my gosh, is that an airplane?
And she was laughing with joy at this photo.
Oh my gosh. Are you kissing the bear? What is that?
He's making a toast of something.
He's toasting.
He was holding the cup in his hand, and it did look like he was kissing it, and the photo has been shared numerous times on social media since. And she said, quote, I can't imagine how he's feeling. It's probably disbelief.
I'm sure that must have been an incredible, elating feeling. And in my last point, just as a statement, the endurance of Marc and his family's perseverance are certainly what made his release a reality. Obviously, Marc being able to withstand the pain that we discussed in our previous episode of the intense situation in a Russian penal colony, the isolation, the monotony, and his family's grit and resilience when it came to keeping his name in the mouths of Americans and keeping his conversation and the initiative for his release alive. I'm sure even when the news cycles started to die down, it was still something that the family was certain they were going to put their all into.
You know, I just want to see him. I want to touch him. I just want to see him. It's very sentimental, so it's going to be hard, but a good kind of hard.
In closing, thank you to Lori and Megan and all of the team at TribLive for your comprehensive work following Marc, his full story, and your continuing dedication to keeping Western Pennsylvania locally informed. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next of the Marc Fogel story and talking with you both in the future.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this week's episode, share the podcast to help keep Western PA locally informed with insightful discussion and the latest news from your area. It's an easy way to spread the word, and it helps our podcast reach more people like you. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify and turn on episode notifications so you never miss new content. Once again, I'm Zac Gibson, and this is From the Newsroom.